I'm Robert LeBoyer, Senior Biotechnology Analyst here at Noble Capital. Our next company making a presentation in our conference will be Cadrenal Therapeutics, a company developing an anticoagulant for orphan markets and specialty markets that are not served by the current anticoagulants on the market. Our presentation will be given by Quang Fang, the Chairman and CEO. Please go ahead, Quang.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks to Noble for hosting this webinar and conference. I also would like to introduce our Chief Medical Officer who will be available for the Q&A, Dr. Douglas Losordo.
Hello, everybody.
I want to show also the forward-looking statements. And now we can begin the presentation. We are Cadrenal Therapeutics. We are a late-stage developmental drug company with a single drug candidate called Tecarfarin, addressing multiple orphan designations and indications and one fast-track designation. We are one study away from submitting to U.S. FDA for possible commercialization with a strong plan and a seasoned team to execute that plan. Our lead candidate is Tecarfarin, a late-stage novel oral and reversible anticoagulant, otherwise known as a blood thinner, to prevent heart attacks, strokes, and deaths due to blood clots in patients with rare cardiovascular conditions who require chronic anticoagulation. We're focused on conditions where the current standard of care, warfarin, the old drug, formerly called Coumadin when it was being promoted, where Coumadin, warfarin, has failed to sufficiently provide reliable anticoagulation protection. And in the newer class of drugs, the DOACs, direct oral anticoagulants like Eliquis and Xarelto, they also have not shown benefits. So just to make sure for the audience, we are not competing against the big drugs like Eliquis and Xarelto. We are going where warfarin has failed. We are addressing orphan conditions where the FDA has deemed that there are no approved treatments, and that if we're successful, the drug Tecarfarin will have potentially up to 7 years of market exclusivity from the date of approval in the US, and possibly up to 10 years in the EMA. These are patients in 3 categories that we're targeting. Those with end-stage kidney disease, ESKD plus atrial fibrillation, those with implanted medical devices, such as left ventricular assist devices, which are devices to help patients with heart failure. And in the third category, thrombotic antiphospholipid syndrome, known as APS. It's an autoimmune condition where the body overproduces antibodies, which then causes blood clots. Next slide. A key investment highlights for the Tecarfarin opportunity. We're very optimistic about the near-term potential with Tecarfarin, as illustrated by these 5 major points. As I stated before, the current standard of care for these patients is sorely inadequate, with high level of unmet needs and no approved therapies. This is an important point. No approved therapy means these are orphan conditions, and the Orphan Drug Act over 35 years ago it was passed to help companies such as Cadrenal provide R&D and come up with the drug to support patients. These conditions affect less than 200,000 patients in the United States. So when we speak with physicians and key opinion leaders, they're frustrated with orphan outcomes, and they're hesitant to prescribe drugs like Eliquis and Xarelto, even though they are newer, because the data showing clinical benefits is not there. So Tecarfarin, like warfarin, has a proven mechanism of action. It works similarly, but it was designed to beat and be better than warfarin. And we have clinical data to prove that. That is a proven and effective blood thinner. It's reversible. And more importantly, the metabolism is different, and it provides a more stable anticoagulation across multiple therapies. And this is why we're so excited about Tecarfarin. And as mentioned before, in addition to the orphan drug designation for end-stage renal plus AFib, we also have a fast track. And from a competitive standpoint, the factor 11s, the next generation are in phase 2 and 3 now. They're in development, but they're not being pursued for these orphan diseases. So we expect this void in the market to continue as these patients were excluded from the DOAC trials for Eliquis and Xarelto, and they are, for what we know today, also excluded in the future trials for factor 11. Putting this into context, it is very unusual for a company of this stage, late stage product, to have our market cap and have one pivotal trial remaining. I think when we go to the managed plan page, you will see that we have extensive commercial experience as well as clinical development experience, as well as big pharma, M&A, business development, and we have a very active board to help us execute our goals and guide us. Next slide on the scientific advisory board, deep cardiovascular, in particular, deep oral anticoagulant drug development ranging from different institutions, from Duke to Harvard to Boston University to McMaster up in Toronto to Baylor. These are key opinion leaders, clinicians and physicians, cardiologists who have participated in major trials, such as the pivotal trial for Eliquis over a decade ago, Dr. Chris Granger from Duke. Let's go back to the problem. The problem remains around rare heart cardiovascular conditions which lack effective blood thinners. And once again, I think most of the audience know the number one cause of death worldwide remains to be cardiovascular heart diseases, stemming from death from strokes, heart attacks, and then heart failure. Our advisors and the leading KOLs across the country and the world have made the problem clear. Despite the advent of the newer drugs, there remains a great need in these rare cardiovascular conditions. This is a big problem. And starting with the LVAD, the left ventricular assist device, cardiologists have no choice except to put these patients on wonderful devices that cost nearly $100,000 on a drug that's 70 years old, warfarin, knowing that there are risk of hemorrhagic events, bleeding events, and strokes from a brain bleed, as well as multiple dose adjustments. Just imagine that, putting these patients on just leading edge devices while protecting them with an old drug like warfarin, and the newer drugs don't work in these areas. Another important point is that the reversal costs, all the patients who go on these drugs need to be able to be reversed in case they have to go in for dental or other procedures. These are high-risk patients, and they deserve a new drug that can potentially help them, like Tecarfarin. There are also recently new published data about the importance of INR, International Normalized Ratio, and time and therapeutic range between 2 and 3 for these patients. And I think you're going to see some more of these type of medical and clinical revelations come back out into the journals and into the public in the near future. In end-stage renal kidney disease and AFib, the warfarin data shows that there's a higher risk of bleeding. Dose adjustment are a challenge, as well as drug-drug interactions with comorbidities in all of these patients. And finally, in drugs like Eliquis, there is limited evidence and there are no guidelines and ambiguity in dosing recommendations from the FDA. Thus, Tecarfarin was granted an orphan drug designation as well as a fast track. Next slide, please. So the solution, Tecarfarin was designed and aimed towards warfarin's major problems and fills a significant market void. The current treatments are unreliable. They're challenging to control, and the metabolism through the P450 have significant variability for Tecarfarin and its PK profiles, plus drug-drug interactions. The drug's retrometabolic drug design resulted in a more stable anticoagulation than warfarin, thereby decreasing the risk of strokes and bleeding for these patients. And this has been proven in our 11 clinical trials in over 1,000 subjects. And unlike warfarin, tecarfarin is metabolized throughout the body tissue esterases, so it's not metabolized by the cytochrome P450, thereby avoiding the drug-drug interaction and the drug-food interaction, as well as genetic variations that have plagued warfarin for over 70 years. Next slide for the market. Just these three areas alone: left ventricular assist devices, end-stage kidney renal and AFib, and thrombotic antiphospholipid syndrome, or APS. In the US alone, the market potential over $2 billion. And let me remind the audience again, the first two, we have orphan drug designation, we have fast track for end-stage renal and AFib, and we have applied for orphan drug designation for thrombotic APS. It's a very attractive market for a product that's late stage and addressing three rare cardiovascular conditions which require a lifetime blood thinning solution. Just a summary of our financial situation. As you can see, we have no debt, $7 million in cash, about 16 million shares outstanding. Our Q4 2003 financial results, we burned about $694,000, and market cap as of last week, and about 7 million as of today. And inside ownership, we are highly incentivized. Insider ownership, it's about 47%. Once again, we have no debt on our balance sheet. We have two more slides. In summary, here is the pipeline depicted. Tecarfarin late stage, ready for phase 3 in left ventricular assist device and end-stage kidney and AFib. They're separate trials. And then we believe, and we should hear from the agency here shortly regarding our orphan drug application for thrombotic APS. There is an accelerated pathway with the end-stage kidney disease with AFib with the fast track designation. Finally, why invest in Cadrenal now? It's clear that we are an underappreciated investment opportunity for a late-stage company with two orphan designations and one trial away from FDA submission for approval review. We have the data through 11 trials in humans and over 1,000 patients in our database. This is where it's frustrating for patients. On one hand, you have warfarin, 70 years old, generic, no support. And then on the other hand, you have a newer class of drug that until a few years ago had no reversal agent, and they cannot address these three areas that we're targeting. And there are no FDA-approved drugs for these three areas. And there are others, but we're going to focus on these three. And we have a drug that has a proven MOA, an accelerated approval pathway with the potential of the $2 billion commercial U.S. market. We're very excited. We thank you for your time. And right now, I will pause the presentation and turn it back over to our host, Robert LeBoyer. Robert?
Thank you, Kwang. That was a very interesting presentation. And, some of the indications that you're addressing are clearly underserved. Having followed the DOAC drugs in their approval pathways and the indications that they were pursuing, they started out and expanded, but found that they were not effective or had safety risks in certain populations. And like you said, you're not going to be competing against them. So I think this is great that you're pursuing these orphan indications where there really is nothing other than warfarin.
That's right, Robert. These drugs were tried in the trials in the implanted medical device and failed, in ESKD plus AFib that was discontinued, and in thrombotic APS that failed. So they tried, but they were not successful.
Well, no drug works everywhere, and they have basically created the market for you. So, that's one of the things that I saw here. One of the other things was that warfarin, like you said, it is variable between patients and even with the same patient over time. So it needs to be titrated and monitored. So that's one of the problems. If the patient starts to take your drug and has better anticoagulation and more consistent drug, what would be the benefits in terms of secondary indications or hospitalization and the benefits of being in the effective range for anticoagulation?
Let me just answer briefly and turn it to our chief medical officer. First of all, we at Cadrenal believe in testing for the INR, the internationally normalized ratio, and the time in therapeutic range. For 60 years worldwide, when warfarin was prescribed under Coumadin or other names around the world, physicians monitored. Just think, people on cholesterol drug are being monitored for their liver enzymes. People have high cholesterol are being monitored. People, diabetes are constantly monitored. These are patients who are at stroke and heart attack, and we went away from monitoring when we had these new drugs. We went away from reversal agents. So I want to make sure we made those 2 points clear for the audience. We believe in testing for INR because TTR has proven to be a very reliable marker for outcomes. And I'll turn that over to Doug Lasorda, our chief medical officer, to address the other questions. Doug?
Thanks, Kwang. Actually, you really laid this out beautifully. And Robert, your question really was, how does having a more stable level of anticoagulation translate into better outcomes for the patient, right? Because the patients don't care about their lab test results, but they do care about having an unnecessary bleeding event or an unnecessary clotting event. And that's the reality, as Kwang just indicated, the stability of anticoagulation. Now, the evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. Stable anticoagulation equals fewer bleeding events, fewer clotting events. And that's what Tecarfarin brings to the table. The first new anticoagulant of its type in 70 years, finally, something that doctors and patients can use that will result in fewer of these events, fewer hospitalizations, and so forth. So that's really the whole reason we're here.
Okay, and when you say these bleeding events and these cardiovascular events, what are we talking about in terms of the type of event and the cost or the hospitalization and the real clinical avoidance that this could help?
Yeah, so just I'll give you one example. In the patients with left ventricular assist devices, what we're talking about are, we're not talking about you nick yourself shaving and you bleed a little bit more. We're talking about major hemorrhagic events that require you being in the hospital, or a clotting event like clotting in your device, heart attack, stroke, embolic stroke. So major events that can be avoided. And, of course, there's the awfulness of the event itself for the patient and the family. And then on top of it, the cost to the healthcare system is very significant for every single new event. That's a burden on the entire system. So we're talking about really reducing burden on patients and burden on society.
Yeah, avoiding heart attacks and stroke, clearly, definitely a benefit for the patient, but also inexpensive. Yeah, most patients like to avoid death, but it's also an expensive hospitalization for the system. So the value of keeping these patients anticoagulated and keeping their blood thinner and avoiding these has a lot of value for your drug and for the system and cost savings for the public.
Absolutely.
Agree.
So, yeah, and in terms of the clinical trials, you mentioned that you have only one left. Could you talk a little bit about the status of the trial and what to expect going forward?
Yeah, I will go, we'll talk a little bit about milestones as well, and then Doug can go into the trials. So I think you can expect, additional regulatory announcements. Like I said, we've applied for the orphan drug designation for thrombotic APS. Very excited about the opportunity there, where the DOACs have failed in that category as well. We're going to have the drug product Tecarfarin ready towards year's end for clinical trial work. There is going to be a trial initiation sometimes towards close to year's end, year's beginning. We're working on a partnership, very active, as you know, having a partner in developing Tecarfarin in one or more of these indications will, I think, facilitate and accelerate that last trial. So as we mentioned before, we have FDA exchanges on the end-stage kidney renal plus AFib. And as we've gone here over the last 2 quarters, there are a number of kidney impaired patients who also are having the LVAD implanted. So there's a crossover there. And I think, when we look back at our analysis and applied for the LVAD orphan drug designation, there's now another trial. And I think it's in the best interest of our investors and shareholders and potential investors to pursue the trial that could be most capital efficient, but also the highest likelihood of succeeding and getting the drug to the market. So that's at the high level, and some upcoming milestones that you can expect to see. And then Doug can talk a little bit more about what the trials look like as far as ESKD, which we've been publicly talking about it, but also initially what the trial could look like for LVAD. Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. What's really interesting about the areas that we're pursuing, and this might strike some people as almost unbelievable, but the indications that we're pursuing actually have no label indicated drug available. That is to say that whether it's ESKD and AFib, patients with a left ventricular assist device, patients with antiphospholipid syndrome that have had a thrombosis, and there are several others as well. There has never been a drug approved to help those patients. Now, that's not to say that drugs aren't used, but they're being used based on the best estimate of the treating doctors and the treating community, not because a clinical trial has been done to prove that they work. And so we're in this really interesting position now of being able to use this better anticoagulant, and for the first time ever, offer patients and doctors proof that the drug will improve their outcomes. And so across the board, we're kind of redesigning this space with this drug and providing real evidence of benefit, as opposed to, I guess you would say, the hope of benefit that's been driving the use of the drugs up to this point.
Okay, great. And just recently, you received a second orphan drug designation for the medical devices. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe what you're planning to do in that space?
Doug, do you want to talk?
I think you're muted.
The orphan designation that you're referring to, Robert, is for patients with a left ventricular assist device. So these are amazing devices that are used to treat patients with end-stage heart failure, most of whom end up not being able to get a transplant because of the lack of availability of those organs. So it's become what's referred to as destination therapy. You get this pump, and it actually makes these patients remarkably better. They're able to increase their quality of life, but they do need to be anticoagulated. The number of these patients around the country and around the world is actually relatively small, but they all need to take anticoagulation forever. And again, even though drugs are used to prevent clotting in those patients, there's never been a clinical study that proves the benefit of those therapies. And so we will be performing such a study comparing to what is the standard of care, albeit you could say an unproven standard of care, but nevertheless, our job is going to be to beat the standard of care, and I think we're going to easily do that and really improve the outcomes in these patients.
Okay, great. All right, and just lastly, could you just outline some of the financial measures and your cash and things going forward and some of the milestones to look forward to in the next 12 months?
Sure. We've got the financial summary back. Once again, our last raise was July of 2023, $7.5 million pipe. We did an IPO for $7 million in January of 2023, and cash at March 11th, a month ago, was $7 million, zero debt, 16 million shares outstanding. We have some warrants with investors that sold at $1.75 when we did the financing in July of 2023. We have we have insiders owning, nearly 50% of the company. And also, burning wise, you can see it's a very limited control burn until we decide to engage, hopefully get a partner in the near term and go down one of these indication, pursuing a pivotal trial. I've mentioned before some of the milestones and some announcements to be expected. We're pursuing another orphan drug indication for a thrombotic APS, thrombotic antiphospholipid syndrome, another rare condition that requires chronic anticoagulation. So that's on the regulatory advancement side, perhaps another fast track or a breakthrough. We're going to have the drug product Tecarfarin ready at year's end, and then we're looking to do a trial near that time as well, as we are, like Doug had said, exploring the dual path of which trial would be more efficient capital wise as well as timing wise, and also timing that with the many discussions we've had with potential partners and investors.
Great. Well, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Dr. Lasordo, Kwong, this has been very interesting, and I would like to thank you for participating and thank everyone who's tuned in to watch. Have a great day.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to Noble Life Science. Have a great day.
Thanks very much.